Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome back to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Rhombus, and I will be speaking to you today about what we do after we win the war. First of all, you may ask yourself, what war? And given the fact that in one tiny form or another we've been at war on something for ever. A video I saw on TikTok recently by a veteran said that we're a war tribe, and I completely agree with him. And by we, I mean the United States of America, of which I am from. But I think, for me, the inciting incident where I stopped calling this a culture war and just a flat-out fucking war is when I read an article on Daily Kos today saying that the Trump campaign asked and was granted the right to question grand jurors. That's just terrorism. A former president of the United States is interfering in the judicial process of a red state run by a red state governor in a blue city where he is criminally charged with interfering in the election and peaceful transfer of power. Between 30 to 45% of the inhabitants of the United States of America think that this is perfectly fine and that he is in the right. Ladies and gentlemen, we have not had a split in this country this large since the year 1860. In 1860, there was a presidential election. A gentleman by the name of Abraham Lincoln was elected. You may have heard of it before. And he basically terrified the South because the South had been able to use tricks and shenanigans and threats to get their way, despite the fact that most of the country by land or by population or even by states did not agree with the egregious behavior of owning other human beings. And in the United States of America, most of the population is not cool with terrorism by a former president. I'm not going to get into how did we get here. I am going to tell you a couple of things. First of all, the original format for this series was supposed to be entertainment of some fictional historical anecdote on Terra, followed by a poem, followed by me ranting about XYZ constitutional topic. And I've thought of some really good ones, and we'll be discussing them. Over the last 5 months, 5 to 7, depending on how you want to define where it started, I have been psychically mugged by a lot of things, including capitalism. I was never a fan of millionaires, but after dealing with a former landlord who was frankly unhinged and abusive, and in my opinion never should have been allowed to hold power over others, I am now thoroughly anti-capitalist. So any discussion, in my opinion, about reforming the Constitution of the United States needs to take that into account. Simply rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic is literally the definition of insanity. And in case you haven't heard that, I will cite it for you. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I'm sure I could find out who quoted that somewhere, and I'm relatively sure that's probably misquoted. It's too good a quote to not have come from several different sources evolving slowly over time. But if anybody who is listening to this podcast truly wants me to find out who said that, I'll be more than happy to Google it for you. In the meantime, I'm going to address some of the larger issues that anyone listening to this podcast will initially have. We'll start with the elephant in the room. Well, the non-rabid satanic terrorist elephant, which is that the United States Constitution is very difficult to amend. You can do it one of three ways. The legislatures of the United States of America might, by 3/4 vote or 2/3 vote, depending on the method used, initiate an amendment that must be passed by both houses, and then it is brought to the states, which must ratify it. These days, that's typically done with a time frame that says it has to be ratified by the states by XYZ window, because there's a couple of amendments that have been ratified because nobody bothered to include an exit clause. So, for example, the best example I can think of that with the window is the Equal Rights Amendment, which technically has passed, but the original legislation said it had to be passed by a certain date. The second method of amending the Constitution, per the Constitution, is to simply have the states pass something and say, screw you, Congress. This was done with the 19th Amendment. It's only been done once, and I forget which amendment. I believe it was the prohibition of alcohol. And which I think might be the 20th Amendment or the 19th Amendment, probably the 19th. Anyway, well, I'm not Googling anything right now. Long story short, the states have basically only overridden the will of Congress one time. And then it was promptly repealed after that thing called, the 1920s, where the mafia just kind of got out of hand, and it's one of the things that helped elect FDR. The third method of amending the Constitution is Article 5. And in case you're not aware of this, there are all kinds of people running all over the internet terrified at conservatives convening an Article 5 convention because they can change the Constitution and they can repeal your rights and all these other things. And I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that that's bullshit. And the reason for that is because a Constitution, to be considered legitimate both internally and externally to the entire world, must be ratified. And even though conservatives, I have zero doubt in my mind, could potentially engineer a constitutional convention with red states and chicanery in blue and purple states, they're never going to get the thing ratified. Any kind of constitution that was put together by a Koch brothers Trump-style constitutional convention is never going to be accepted by even a majority of the states, or even a majority of the population of the United States of America. So, can they potentially do an Article 5 convention? Yeah, sure. Is it going to be ratified? The odds are approaching zero. Now, they might fake ratify it, but who cares? I mean, at that point, they could just as easily take over the country, which, frankly, they're very likely to be able to do, or at least they're going to make a try for it. And I'll save that for my anniversary series that I'm going to be doing once a year for probably in perpetuity until the Republican Party is fixed, which is probably in perpetuity for the Before the Coup series. But before the Article 5 convention requires just as many states as it takes to ratify the thing, to propose an amendment in the first place. So it's really, really hard to do, especially given how much disagreement there is between the red and blue states at this point. The thing is that most people don't remember this, but the history of the Constitution is that immediately after the Revolutionary War, they had this thing called the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation were deliberately designed to be as weak as possible. And so, what that means is that there was no Supreme Court, the executive was just an afterthought, and it was a unicameral legislature that tried all kinds of things, and everybody pretty much ignored it. It was a joke. And after 13 years, the rest of the world pretty much ignored the states, made individual foreign deals with a few states here and there, but basically the United States of America was not considered a power. They weren't anything to be reckoned with, and they were totally ignored. They were basically a global joke, a global embarrassment. The Founding Fathers, or at least the ones that were still alive, were not happy about this. So, under cover of, quote, reforming the Articles, in quote, when actually everybody kind of understood that they were basically going to be throwing out the whole thing and starting from scratch, they had this little thing in 1789 called the Constitutional Convention. And for the time, and for the experience they had, it was, despite all of its flaws, a pretty fucking amazing document. There are problems, however. We've had more than 200 years, approaching 225, where we've learned some things since then, like women should be allowed to vote. You should be allowed to vote no matter what your race, creed, color, sexual orientation are. You should be allowed to vote if you don't own property. The United States of America should not be centered on rural agrarian economics. We are a modern first world economy. We should be allowed to have urban areas where is more thought and more people run the country rather than Albany, New York, telling New York City what it should or shouldn't be doing with its state laws. But because of the way Jefferson and a lot of the slave-owning South founding fathers thought that the Constitution should be, it's really, really easy for rural areas in the House of Representatives and rural states with, 5 people and a couple of chickens in Wyoming to have equal vote to California and New York. And I have a problem with this, and people who are educated understand this and have a problem with it too. So the thing is that before you say that we can't have a constitution or the Constitution doesn't allow it, I want you to understand that the Constitution of the United States of America was illegal per the Articles of Confederation. The entire United States government was founded on an illegal act. Actually, technically too, because the Revolutionary War was also illegal. There wasn't like some special revolution British law that says, hey, if the king is being a jackass and not giving and doing taxation without representation, you can go ahead and secede. Now, ironically, and some people will disagree with me, but it's the rape court, so I don't care. Technically, the South was totally justified in seceding from the United States of America. That's per Article 10 of the Constitution, which says that all rights in this document, which specifically aren't mentioned as being for the federal government, belong to the states. Well, guess what? There's nothing in the document at all, including to this day, by the way, that says that a state can't secede from the Union. Therefore, a state has the right to secede from the Union. Now, the Supreme Court has found it to the contrary of this, but here's the thing. The Supreme Court has a rapist on it. The Supreme Court has said that police can arrest you without cause, without reason, without evidence, and they've also said that women are slaves in ignoring the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. So basically, the current Supreme Court is utterly ignoring, whenever it's convenient, the rights enumerated very clearly in the Constitution. Other problems with the Constitution include the Second Amendment, which is written with such arcane, esoteric language that it allows educated, self-deluded people to think that even though it clearly says well-regulated, that they are allowed to literally... I swear to God, I got into a conversation with a libertarian once who felt that per the Constitution, they were allowed to own nukes. Nukes, ladies and gentlemen, that's the people that we're dealing with here. So now that we're at war, and whether you want to call that the Second Cold War, the preamble to the Second Civil War, which will eventually get hot, and mark my words, at this point, it will get hot. Now, whether or not that's an actual coup attempt with military fighting on military, or that's a bunch of idiots in pickup trucks getting bombed by the United States military in a 5 to 10 minute war, I don't know. But at some point, the people on the right are going to try and take over this government. They're going to try and take over our country. They may just try and secede, but given the fact that most of their leaders understand that all of the actual wealth, all of the actual value in this country is mostly in blue states, they're going to probably try and take our liberty rather than live in poverty and just simply try and walk away. So what that means is, ladies and gentlemen, if you listen to my series Before the Coup, you understand how difficult it is to put Humpty Dumpty back together. And if you listen to my series 11 Fixes for a Broken Everything, if you're still deluded enough to think that a new constitution isn't going to work, I have plenty of suggestions for how to fix things there. But if you're like me, are looking around and admitting that between climate change, techno-fascism, capitalism, poverty, and basically just the filth and lies on the internet that our society is fundamentally and irretrievably broken, then it's time we had a strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, strategy or tactics without strategy is a failure. Now, some of the Democrats, not all of them, but some of the Democrats are very good at treading water, right? They're very good at saying vote blue no matter who. They'll come out with very clever and interesting commercials. They'll find a way to get the right candidate. They'll get out the vote. But there's basically no united strategy in the Democratic Party to fix the Republican Party, to fix this country. And that's mainly because the leaders of the Democratic Party are perfectly fine with things the way they are. They give a lot of lip service to how much they empathize with people and how they want to fix things. But the fact of the matter is that right now in the United States Senate, there's one man who's holding up thousands, literally thousands of officer promotions affecting the defense readiness of the United States. And not one senator that I'm aware of is willing to go scorched earth and basically burn the world to lessen the power of individual senators. That's why Tuberville is still able to get away with this stuff. And when the senators are more interested in their own power than the security of the United States of America, much less all of the appropriations and economic reform and climate change reform that we need to have, it tells you all you need to know about the Democratic Party. And I'm sure that there's a lot of tribal Democrats out there that disagree with me, but frankly, I think we can all agree that people who think that the Democrats are the best thing in the world, and I'm not talking about people who are willing to vote Democrat like I am. I'm talking about tribal Democrats whose answer to everything is vote like your life depends on it, vote blue no matter who. Well, your life does depend on your vote. And I do encourage you to vote blue, usually no matter who. But make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, that's tactics. That's not strategy. Now, for those not familiar with military terminology, strategy is how you're going to get to your end goal, right? In World War II, our goal was defeat the Nazis, defeat Imperial Japan, and stop them from trying to kill us and take over the world. And the strategy was in the Pacific War, it was island hopping, and in the English War, in the war against the Nazis, it started with D-Day, and then it was get Berlin. Right? That's the overall high-level decision of what we need to do. In tactics, it's things like, how are we going to win the Battle of the Bulge? How are we going to fool the Nazis into thinking that we're going to land on this part and this part, right? The Democrats are doing good with tactics. They're like, okay, our best bet to defeat Donald Trump in 2024 is to have all the Democrats unite behind Biden, and then we're good, right? Well, what about 2028? Right? What about 2026? They're not thinking about this at all. There are a few people here and there, but most of the people who are doing this thinking are think tanks who are doing everything they can to delay serious reform as long as possible to let rich millionaires retain as much wealth and power as they possibly can for as long as they can. And ladies and gentlemen, that is not sustainable. And the Democrats have basically been the only viable party, I'm going to argue, since Dwight Eisenhower, but certainly by any stretch of the imagination, since Donald Trump was elected. You can choose where you want to define fascism. I now define it as Dwight Eisenhower, post-Dwight Eisenhower. But any way you choose to shave it, the fact is the Republicans are lost. They are lost, and many of them are infected with a type of thought that makes them willing to do anything for power. There are no means that are unacceptable to them. There is no bottom. There is nothing that they will not do. If you do not accept the fact that they have become fascists, and fascism has a lot of different terminologies and a lot of different fancy things that people use, but to me the simplest definition of fascism is weaponized nationalism willing to do anything to increase and maintain power for the few. And by that definition, the Republicans are unequivocally a fascist party. And I'm sure I hear some Greens out there going, well, that's the Democrats too, man. Well, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm not interested in having that discussion. Go off and twiddle your thumbs and elect more anti-vaxxer candidates like RFK Jr. The fact of the matter is that if you're this far into the podcast, you agree with me at least enough to understand that there's a serious problem. And whether or not you agree to my solutions, the fact of the matter is I felt the need to do this series because nobody is having this discussion. There is no real discussion of strategy. Even in the certain cases where people have good ideas like ranked choice voting or ballot initiatives and making those, national policy, or things like I really love the climate conservation corp that Biden came up with. I mean, I don't like Biden anymore, but I do agree that he's done some good things. But the fact of the matter is, they're individual. Even the people who have some strategic ideas don't have an overall strategy. And by the way, that strategy at this point, ladies and gentlemen, has to be eradicate fascism from the United States of America. It has to be taken out root and branch. Now, does that mean that people have to be killed or put in camps? Only if necessary. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't accept the fact that fascism never goes away voluntarily, you don't understand fascism. Europe certainly doesn't. The closest we have is Germany, which realized that it had to make Nazism illegal, but it didn't make fascism illegal because that's difficult to do. And I'm going to talk about some things that I think we need to do in individual episodes, and some of them are going to be very controversial, like the fact that I no longer believe in unlimited freedom of speech. And some members of the cult of the First Amendment are going to, be shrieking, or this is when I lose them, and frankly, I don't care. Any society that allows something like Fox News to exist that is literally doing stochastic and in certain cases actual terrorism against the Constitution and freedom of the people of the United States, you have a problem. You have a systemic problem. We have a virus in this country, and it is worse than COVID ever was, and it's called fascism. Now, I have put a lot of thought into this. Now, there are other people who have put thought into a new constitution. But most of those people are not anti-capitalist. Most of those people have certainly not had the background and training I have in understanding the way you form culture. The Constitution needs to do all of these things. And I'm going to, bit by bit, slowly over time, break this down into manageable chunks. But what you need to understand right now is my strategy, what I'm proposing, is that we bypass Article 5, and we, the people of the United States of America, bypass the federal government and start working on everybody should have their own constitution. Just like everybody has a song they want to write in Nashville, or everybody has a script in Los Angeles. I want every blue city and every blue state in America to have millions and millions of constitutions, and we all come together and find the best one and bypass the federal government, which is completely and fundamentally broken, and then ratify a constitution in blue cities and blue states and purple cities and purple states. And if the red states want to come along too, great. Otherwise, they're protectorates. But I'll get to that in time, and we'll go from there.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my books anywhere but Amazon.com. Creative Commons 2023. Red Anvil Amalgamated, LLC. To fight the forces of evil! Also, no Creative Commons are allowed corporation whatsoever.